to a special edition of the Darden Admissions Podcast. I'm your host, Brett Twitty, and you are listening to a new episode. On this episode of the podcast, we have a very special guest, actually a repeat guest here on the Darden Admissions Podcast, Greg Fairchild. Greg is a Darden faculty member, and he is also the Dean and CEO of UVA Northern Virginia. I recently caught up with Greg to talk about what he's been up to, plans for UVA Northern Virginia in the year ahead, the vision for UVA Northern Virginia, and so much more. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. And as always, if this conversation is helpful for you, please like this episode and subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an update. And remember, you can always check the episode description for links to Darden blogs, social channels, and more. And now, without further ado, here is my conversation with Greg Fairchild. Greg, welcome to the podcast.
Brett, it's great to be back on the podcast. I feel like I'm showing up to a treasured event that I was waiting to happen again. So I'm glad to get invited back. Thank you.
Yeah, it's always great to have you here. We always have great conversations, and I know how busy you are, so appreciate your willingness to take some time out of your day to catch us up on what's been going on with UVA Northern Virginia. I've really been looking forward to this conversation.
Well, I'd offer that as I think about our conversations, they always are wide-ranging and enjoyable. So I'm looking forward to it too. So let's jump in. Let's begin with, what is UVA Northern Virginia? This is probably one of the most common questions I'm asked. And, the first thing that I'll tell you is that it's a notion that has existed at the university for actually quite a long time. Anyone who lives in Northern Virginia and has driven on Route 66 will tell you there for years has been a Virginia Tech UVA Falls Church Center sign just off the highway. And in fact, what we can tell you is UVA has not been in that facility for about 5 years, but that sign still remains. And so a frequent confusion people have is, oh, you mean this place over in Falls Church? And in fact, we don't. And for anyone who's wondering, we are in conversations with the state about getting that sign changed. And so we'll see how that progresses. The idea that UVA would be in Northern Virginia, at least in terms of the discourse I've been a part of, first begins at the Darden School. The Darden School was considering ways to think about the Executive MBA program. And the Executive MBA, Brett, you well know, was a program that we had run and we launched. Even at inception, Marion Moore and some of the faculty considered the idea that the program would run in Washington, D.C. And the reason was as simple as there was an understanding that many of the people who would be the working professionals who might do the program would be coming from Northern Virginia to Washington, D.C. Brett, you were involved, so you certainly know these things. Do you remember when those discussions began?
Yeah, I remember when I first got to Darden, 2015, the Executive MBA program and Global Executive MBA program, two separate programs at that time. Both were essentially based in Charlottesville. In the fall of 2015, I got called into a meeting and was told that we're going to try to launch a section in the Washington, D.C. metro area. And as part of that effort, we were going to combine the two programs, Executive MBA and Global Executive MBA, into one unified program with a new structure and design, and try to grow the class size. Ideally, two sections of Executive MBA students. At that time, one section would be in the Washington, D.C. metro area in Roslyn, and the other section would be down in Charlottesville. I remember those days well, Greg, because the reality was I felt like in that fall period, I just gotten to a place where I could really explain the Executive MBA and Global Executive MBA programs, the differences between the two, help students choose between the two, and then get called into a meeting and realize, well, everything's changing, but also in a very exciting way, too.
Well, what's great about this is I think those discussions continued for a while. And I got called in after there had been one of these discussions that had gone on within the Darden School. And Dean Bob Bruner asked me to lead a committee. And that committee was composed of faculty, it was composed of staff, a large group, 10 people. And we came back and made a recommendation to the Darden board. The Darden board and the dean proceeded to work on the launch of the program in Northern Virginia. Now, I could spend more time on what happened with Darden in Northern Virginia, but I think Anyone listening to this podcast who's in Northern Virginia kind of knows how this story turns out. It does turn out to be two sections. It does turn out to be overwhelming response from the market. It turns out that it is now the largest serving executive MBA in the Washington, D.C. region. Now, Brett, is it the largest MBA in the Washington, D.C. region? Or I've been wondering that.
It certainly is amongst executive MBA programs. I think one of the things that I always highlight, Greg, and I think one, people should know that we've been operating in the DC area since fall of 2016. We had an executive MBA section beginning fall 2016. And I think sometimes people don't realize that we've been in the DC area with a degree program as a Darden school for almost 10 years at this point. So we're getting there. We also now have an MSBA program, which followed closely on the heels of the Executive MBA launch. The Executive MBA program essentially showed that we can do this here, that there's market demand. And so the school started to look for other opportunities. The MS in Business Analytics, as it's known, is a partner program between Darden and the McIntire School of Commerce, about 60 to 65 students per matriculated class. And that's a 12-month cohort-based program. So that was the next program. And then just a few years ago, we're currently recruiting the fourth class of part-time MBA students, but just a few years ago, we launched a part-time MBA program. And so the thing that I highlight is that when I got to Darden in the winter of 2015, we had 0 students learning out of a location in the Washington, D.C. metro area. As of today, here we are, September 2024, we have over 500 students learning out of a location in the Washington, D.C. metro area. And that's in a period of time less than 10 years, essentially, from 0 to over 500. Now, across 3 degree programs, all serving working professionals. And to your point, Greg, being in the DC area, being able to bring Darden here, obviously the reputation and brand of Darden, but with the accessibility and convenience and just the market potential of being in the Washington, D.C. area really, I think, helped the school grow its working professional audience and reach a group of students who, frankly, probably could not have considered coming to Charlottesville for a degree program. It just wouldn't have worked with their schedule.
Brett, I'm really glad you mentioned this issue of people who could come versus a desire to come. And, one of the things we talk so much about is coming to Northern Virginia and coming to a satellite campus provides access. Sometimes there's this feeling, this thought that somehow the students that are in the Northern Virginia campus activity would be a different type of student. And we could agree that maybe that might be true on some variables, but my finding is that it's not quality of student. It may be differences in path, life, journey, but the notion that someone always has the ability to shift, to move to a campus location and live there throughout their academic journey, putting other things on hold, is a wonderful opportunity if one can do it. But everyone can't do it, and not everyone wants to do that for all kinds of personal reasons. And that's been a mental shift we've had as we've proceeded. So taking us back, Terry Sullivan sends me a note and says, could you come over and talk with me? Terry Sullivan is the past president of the university. And that conversation engaged in notions of what we'd done with Darden in Northern Virginia, how we thought about it, what we were thinking of doing, why we were thinking of doing it. And she said, would you be willing to lead a similar project for the University of Virginia in which you would envision and think about what might happen? Now, it's important to mention that that conversation is happening in a certain context. Terry Sullivan is still the president. The university had, in a period just before this, entered into an agreement with Inova Hospitals and with George Mason University to create a unit in Northern Virginia, which really had less of an academic educational interest, but more of an academic research interest. In fact, it was known as the Global Genomics Institute. And that, in fact, this Global Genomics Institute would be a place where research in genomics would occur. Stuff that happens in what are called wet labs, stuff that happens in a vivarium, which is where you have animals that are used in research. But also, this facility would create new businesses that could be generated out of the global genomics opportunities that were coming. So this research would happen. They would think about ways the research would be commercialized, and there was to be a side-by-side investment fund. Well, a lot of things happened. We began to proceed down that path, and a thing called the COVID crisis enters the discourse. Further, as we began down that path, the president of the university changed from Terry Sullivan to James Ryan. And then second, the president of Inova Hospitals changed. And so the partners, as they were, became a bit of musical chairs. One of the big things that came out of that was that on the back end, Inova Hospital said, we're not as interested in doing types of basic research anymore. We're going to spend more time doing clinical work. And so that really changed the scope of what this enterprise could be. While the notion initially was that global genomics research into commercialized opportunities was the idea, when we refashioned everything after the changes went on, we really thought about this being an opportunity around workforce training and development. Again, coming back to what you said earlier, Brett, that there's a type of person who she can't pick up her life and move it to Charlottesville, and she may want to get the education she needs side by side with what's going on in her daily life. And that was a big part of the impetus that we talked to the state about. And that's a big part of the impetus that we talk with the partners about. And that's what the unit does now, albeit on this same Inova Hospitals campus, which is also kind of an interesting place to do this work. We are right across the street from one of the largest hospital systems on the East Coast. And actually, the hospital itself is one of the largest OBGYN birthing centers in the United States. So we have this location in Fairfax, and I'm hoping many of the listeners envision themselves at some point visiting. Let me tell you a little bit about it. It's about 120 acres of space. It is the largest underdeveloped space in Northern Virginia. And the old ExxonMobil campus is there, a set of buildings that have been refashioned. But in addition, there are wonderful woods, walking trails. We even have UVA bees there. So we have 2 UVA beehives. They are a part of the environment that we have there. It's verdant, and having pollinators around is an important thing. And so if you come visit and care about bees, come take a look at the UVA beehives. One is in orange, one is in blue. Now, we should probably get to the heart of the matter. What exactly are going to be the types of things that are going to go on? And, one of the things we came to a realization about was that because spaces turn out to be very similar across educational domains, unlike some other places that students might be more familiar with, rather than walking in a building where every student is studying the same topic, in our spaces, you'll find that there'll be an engineering student in the first classroom learning various things about systems engineering. You'll find that right next to them will be students learning things about real estate from the architecture school. You'll find right next to them, there'll be students learning about public health, and so on and so on. The other difference will be that the day of education will extend from 8 in the morning till 10 o'clock at night. As you know, Brett, that's what happens at Sands Family Grounds. And this, again, is a shift from what UVA programs are typically offered in Charlottesville, where classes happen between essentially 8 and 5. That will then extend the day and make the education available for a broader base of learners. And that's, again, a part of our access notion. Now, in addition to this space opening in February, people that are in the region, they'll start seeing advertising in the metros, and we've done those before. There'll be advertising in mass transit. There'll be pieces they'll see in the Washington Post and some of the other leading publications, and they'll all be letting folks know that we are open for business, and we're open for business in Northern Virginia. And I'm using the pronoun we because it's all of UVA is open for business and not just the Darden School. Now, Brett, do I have it right that you said on balance there are about 500 students right now matriculating in a given year in Northern Virginia? How many are matriculating in Charlottesville in a given year?
Yeah, it's a good question, Greg. And I will say the 500 or so students that we've gotten to here at Sands Family Grounds, part of that is, we have about 120 or so executive MBA students per matriculated class. We have about 60 to 65 MSBA students, and a class of part-time MBA students is typically around 70 students. So the part-time MBA program has a variable completion timeline, so we can actually have multiple classes of students potentially completing their degree requirements at any one time. The executive MBA program is two years start to finish. MSBA is 1 year start to finish. So think about all of these groups together. That's how you kind of get to over 500. Now, down in Charlottesville, you have the full-time MBA program, which at this point is typically matriculating about 350 or so students per class. It varies from year to year, sometimes a little bit closer to 335, some years a little north of 350, but around 350. So you probably have about 700 or so students down in Charlottesville learning out of the full-time MBA program. So the gap between Roslyn and Charlottesville in terms of total enrollment has closed significantly over these past few years, certainly with the introduction of the part-time MBA program and the growth of that program from not just the first class of students to now having three class of students and working on the fourth.
Brett, how many students do we have that are in the PhD program? And I, of all people, should know that, but I'm just guessing.
It does vary from year to year. I think we recently started the PhD program again, focused, I think, primarily on the areas of strategy, ethics, entrepreneurship, and then quantitative analysis. And I think we have somewhere around maybe 8, 9 PhD students currently enrolled. But that program is intentionally small. There's only so many spaces, and the number of spaces can vary from year to year.
Well, I'm asking in the sense that, so we're looking at probably 40% of the students who are part of the greater Darden enterprise are matriculating in Northern Virginia. This, of course, excludes executive education. I know that the admissions podcast is less focused on that. Please know we'll talk a little bit about that when we talk about Northern Virginia as well, and the university as a whole. Now, so then after February, the question is, what are y'all going to do? You got 55,000 square foot of space. And my preamble about use of space is to let listeners know that we are going to be admitting across a broad range of programs. And by doing that, we're providing opportunities to give students the engagement with people from other parts of the university. But we're also doing it so that we can think of new combinations that haven't existed, let's say, before. Let's say that it is in the shared spaces that an engineering student is sitting next to a public health student. They think of something they'd like to do that would be an app that would find some way to help people with, and I'm making this up, diabetes. But then there would be a student sitting near them as well that would be studying some of the challenges that people have with autism. And they'd get in a conversation, and that conversation would lead them to think of something that they wouldn't have thought of doing before. That's the generalized benefit that we think people are going to get out of this combined spaces notion, which again will be different from what they've seen on many university campuses. So I'm probably going to challenge myself to remember all that we are having launch next year. So please know that I might leave something out, but first of all, let me think about the things that we've been doing already. So some programs have been launched prior to us actually creating the space. Listeners may not know that currently third and fourth year medical students can choose to take the more clinical portion of their education along with classroom in Northern Virginia. And that we have about 72 of those students that are in Northern Virginia now. Next, students may not know that we have nursing students. The pedagogy for nursing and medicine is that the two are working side by side. So we do have nursing students as well. We also have been running the systems engineering program, which, by the way, is called the Accelerated Masters in Systems Engineering. And that had also, almost like the Darden Executive MBA, had run in Charlottesville for a very, very long time. It is recently repositioned to Northern Virginia and will continue to run out of Northern Virginia. And frankly, for many of the same reasons. The participants were overwhelmingly coming out of the Northern Virginia area. And so that made sense to them. That then leads to some conversations about types of clusters that we would have. And one of those is the ones that I've been mentioning. One of those clusters would be in STEM. So you can imagine that there would be coursework in healthcare. Public health certificates will be a part of what we'll also offer. These will be stackable public health certificates that lead to masters in public health. We currently have a public health program in Charlottesville. Again, this is being repositioned to the Northern Virginia area. And so you can think of the public health program, the medical students, the nursing students, and you've got a cluster now that's around education. Next, you can imagine a second cluster existing around data science. The area is a big area for cyber companies, for data science providers. This is a growth area in this market. And once again, we can imagine a cluster which includes our School of Data Science. We can imagine Darden with the MSBA happening in Roslyn. And we can also imagine the MSMIT, which is a part of the McIntyre complex right now. All of these providing a new way of thinking about that cluster of need and how that need then plays out. We can imagine a third cluster, and you will be seeing this, that will exist around public affairs and leadership. And so our Batten School of Leadership and Public Policy is going to be looking at ways of offering programming in really two core areas, public affairs and leadership, those being two distinct tracks within the Batten School. Those will also be offered in the region. I don't want to leave out a couple of other things. First of all, the university has a number of institutes. These are organizations that are non-academic in their thrust. That is, they create knowledge, but they don't have a particular educational aim. And so these could include the Miller Center. These could include the Weldon Cooper Center. These could include some of the projects like the Brain Institute at UVA. These organizations, these institutes, these centers, have missions that are the creation of knowledge. We're going to be helping them with diffusing and distributing that information. A lot of that could happen in non-degree activities, but some of the early discussions are that some of those might end up being various novel forms of master's degrees. The only other thing I can think of at this point to mention is that a good portion of this work will, similar to the lead of Darden, be offered both online and in person. This idea that the student might come from distance that is outside of the Northern Virginia region. But also this notion that even when you look at online education in general, from the best players in the world, there's a strong regionality to the work that they do. So what we find is that Harvard, for example, you could imagine this arguably is one of the best brands one can have in education. And if you looked at the Harvard online education offerings, the matriculants are coming out of largely the Northeastern United States. Well, we know and have been doing research on whether the matriculant in Northern Virginia might be interested in online education, or the possibility of online education along with some of the opportunities to bring people together in real space. And so that'll be a part of what we'll do. And that, I guess, brings me finally to affinity. Northern Virginia is the largest place that students come from prior to attending the University of Virginia. And that's true for all degrees. That's not a phenomenon that exists outside of um, a particular program. It's a generalized phenomenon for the university as a whole. We know that Northern Virginia is one of the prime locations that recruiters come from looking for talent. And we know that it is our largest base of alumni. And I think, Brett, it is the largest base of alumni for the Darden School as well. So even in business, where you might think it's San Francisco, you might think it's New York, I'm reasonably sure, check me, isn't it DC?
Yes, it's DC, and certainly a big part of the appeal for our working professional students who are focused on the DC metro area to know that they can plug into such a robust alumni network from the Darden School, as well as all the UVA presence that's there. That matters. Now, I will say, Greg, to your point about regionality, for our executive MBA program, about two-thirds of those students come from within 60 miles of our location in Roslyn. The other third come from further away. A typical executive MBA class, and this is a program that was designed with travelers in mind. It's hybrid in structure. It's two-thirds in person, one-third online. The core of the schedule is really around once a month weekend residencies in Roslyn with online class a couple nights per week. That schedule can be done from really kind of anywhere in the domestic United States. And we will typically have 12 to 13 states of residency represented in an executive MBA class. Our part-time MBA program, because it follows an evening weeknight schedule, is what I would consider really kind of a local program. 90+% of those students come from within 30 miles or so of our location here in Roslyn. MSBA can look a little bit more like executive MBA in terms of where it pulls from, although it does still pull heavily from DC, Maryland, and Virginia. Those areas very close to our location in the Northern Virginia area. It is hybrid in structure. It has 10 weekend residencies over the course of the 12 months of the program. So it can be done and you can travel in for it. But again, all of these programs do pull from the DC metro area. And again, getting back to our conversation about access and convenience, schedule, time, all of these kinds of things that are on the minds of your working professional student, the student who's looking to do school in addition to work and life. Those things really matter.
Well, you said that incredibly well. And let me add, the location also means these are the places we can do affinity. Everyone loves coming to Charlottesville for reunion, but interspersed between the 5 year or even every year annual trip, we know that we can do things in the Northern Virginia footprint that engage people in real time. We had an event last year that was the University Symphony in Northern Virginia. And, we know that there's lots of following for that group. 200 various UVA folks came out, friends and family. Many of the students that are in the symphony in Charlottesville have parents, no surprise, who live in Northern Virginia. And so this was a great night, great music. I enjoyed it immensely, and we're going to do more of that. We're going to do that again this coming year. You're going to see other things. There'll be a run with Jim. It's going to happen when we do the opening in February. Like I said, there's a bunch of trails at the Northern Virginia location in Fairfax. We had a fireside chat with Goli Shohalasmi, and she's a DC Dean's Fellow. She's also a Darden alum. She's the CEO of Politico. And she came in and gave a talk to a group of alumni, to a group of Batten students, to a group of Darden students, and to a set of public affairs Batten students. That type of gathering is the type of thing we're going to just do more of. And we're going to really try to recognize that we can bring the fun of Northern Virginia to the places where people currently live, but also the learning to those types of events you get to have access to in Charlottesville. The final thing I'll say is that our intent is to continue to listen. And by that, I mean, we are going to offer educational programs when we find that they're the types of educational programs that people that are in the region are needing right now. A lot of times the model on a campus school is that we have a range of things. In fact, it's the breadth of courses that we offer, from things as minuscule as, I'm making this up, amphibian development. And there may be a faculty member who does amphibian development, and she or he is the best in the world. And we love that person is working at UVA. And as much as that's great, we would only do a program in amphibian development if we knew there were lots of people in the Northern Virginia region that needed and wanted amphibian development for their own growth. That again is this tied to the market and how the market is going to be seeking certain types of talent. And so if listeners out there are wondering, as I said, we're going to be broad. We're going to tie to what the market is interested in. You may know that there are 27 different university satellite campuses in Northern Virginia already. And so what will we do that's different? Well, we're going to be bringing the high quality that UVA is known for. And that'll be a big part of why we think people will be attracted to us. Secondly, we have that great affinity already in the market. People are aware of us and people are connected to us. And we feel like that's going to be part of what we bring to them. The third thing that I would note is that as we come into the market, my expectation is that while there might be a satellite campus from USC or satellite campus from UNC, as you know, or satellite campus from NYU, my observation is that most of those satellite campuses are one or two programs from one or two schools. So it'll be an MBA program. It'll be a certain type of public affairs program, but not a breadth that'll cut across many schools. When we launch next year, my expectation is that we will have the broadest enrollment across different types of educational needs and different types of educational journeys of any of the schools operating in the region. And my expectation is that perhaps in a relatively short period of time, we'll be able to say something like you're saying, Brad, about the Executive MBA. It'll be one of the largest enrollments for these types of satellite campuses in Northern Virginia, if not the United States.
Well, that's certainly a lot of exciting developments there, Greg, and think a lot of things on the way. I'm sure you're looking forward to getting the space open and having some of these programs operational and students in the classrooms. I know that will be an exciting day. I really appreciated your point about Charlottesville as well. I think this is one of the things that we've really tried to underscore with prospective students as Darden has been doing things here in the Washington, D.C. metro area. All of our professional degree programs, Executive MBA, Part-Time MBA, MSBA, all have touch points in Charlottesville. We want students to feel connected to the university, to the main grounds, to have that experience. And there are a few reasons for that. One, we want you to think of yourselves not just as Darden students, but also as University of Virginia students and feel that connection to the university. But also, we feel like there's something nice about separating yourself, going down, spending a week, or spending, in the case of our MSBA students, a couple weekends down in Charlottesville, just to have that time with your classmates where you're at some remove, perhaps from your everyday life, and you can kind of maybe immerse in things just a little bit more. I think that's something that all the students really enjoy, and what they find is they get to Charlottesville and they love it. And they want to find more ways to get down to Charlottesville. So there's any number of student-led activities around winery trips, football games, basketball games. They go to Fox Field, all of this kind of stuff. And I think it's important to note for people as you're looking at a working professional program, you may actually find that you have more time than you realize when you're a prospective student on the outside looking in. And there's all this social stuff that also comes with being a working professional student in the best possible way, right? This does not have to be a transactional experience where you're just getting a degree and moving on. I think the students who choose these Darden programs are looking for that more holistic, more community-oriented experience. And I think Charlottesville is part of that. That's certainly ethic across the university. I think about UVA and Darden. Generally, these are community places. These are places where relationships matter between faculty and staff and students.
Well, I don't want to add, but you've reminded me of something I didn't mention. So the other thing I should say about this outpost in Northern Virginia is it gives us opportunities for the student who's matriculating in Charlottesville to do things he or she couldn't do. And so we already know that many of the researchers that we have at the university do their work in Northern Virginia. We already know that. But you could imagine any number of fields where the Northern Virginia marketplace, be it cybersecurity, be it data science, be it public health and the study of autism, be it nursing and various types of nursing specialties. You can imagine all of these have great opportunities in a large metropolitan area. And the opportunity for people to do practica or research or engage directly with organizations in their field is a big part of what we also offer by having the base in Northern Virginia.
Well, I appreciate everything that you've shared here. I think one of the reasons why I was excited to have you on the podcast is we talked on the podcast about all the things that Darden is doing in the Washington, D.C. metro area. And clearly, Sands Family Grounds is, as mentioned, over 500 students learning out of this space. It's the base location for our professional degree programs. There's a lot of energy and activity around that location. But I think it's also important for prospective students to know that the Northern Virginia area is not just a priority for the Darden School. It's also a priority for the University of Virginia. So while Darden may have been first, there's a lot of other things that are coming here with UVA Northern Virginia and the space opening in Fairfax and all the degree programs that you mentioned.
Brett, appreciate the opportunity. And if anyone is interested in knowing more, there is a UVA Northern Virginia website, which includes information about all the programming that is being done and will be done.
Well, one more question for you, Greg. I wonder, obviously, you're somebody who's doing a lot of things, and this is sort of a more macro question. Obviously, I've sort of channeled more of the Darden perspective here. You've been talking about UVA Northern Virginia. How do you think these two schools will benefit each other? How do you think they'll work together, these two efforts up here in the DC area?
Well, I absolutely love this question. I think that so much of our notions in Northern Virginia are about the combining of forces rather than the atomized or individual approach. And so I can see at least three different areas that there'll be wonderful opportunities. Darden in so many ways and business schools in so many ways are about thinking about innovations and about thinking about creation of new companies and new firms. Well, those innovations come from, more often than not, new knowledge and new research. And so I'll hark back to the example I gave earlier. We can imagine that the Darden or the business school student at McIntyre or Darden is talking with someone in public health about something that they're doing in diabetes reduction, right? And that the engineering student sitting right next door can be thinking about how to materialize and operationalize this idea. That's something that we think happens and we try to foster, but we believe that space matters and place matters. Being in a place like Northern Virginia, you're right near capital providers. You're right near other forms of resources that could help a new venture. Next, there's the existing corporate learner. So we've talked mainly about people that were coming through the admissions process, but there's a huge market, as the Darden School well knows, for various types of non-degree ed that we call executive education. That market is sizable in Northern Virginia, but also cuts, shall we say, across the whole organization. One of the things that we can do, and we are doing, is providing education to people across the stack. So an example would be UVA Northern Virginia has launched an educational program with Amazon. And that program, by the way, includes faculty from 5 schools, including Darden faculty. Well, here's what's interesting about it. The Amazon program is not an educational program for Amazon executives. It's a program for the sellers, the entrepreneurs who sell candles or sell hair care products or sell products for people who own bunnies. That's an actual company. That they can find and be educated on better ways to run their businesses, which are on the Amazon platform already. They can grow their businesses quicker with a deeper sense of business principles, along with knowledge that fits the field they're coming from. And we've been able to do that, again, with faculty and involvement of 5 different schools. I think the third thing that I look forward to as the units begin to interact is this affinity thing. So right now, when you come to a reunion, Well, you're coming to the reunion with people that are from your school. And that's great because you get to see old friends, reconnect, rekindle, whatever you like to offer. But if we can do more interactions and engagements in an affinity way across schools around topics, let's say that we, for example, focused on real estate, or we, for example, focused on manufacturing in nuclear power, or we focused on a growing business in Northern Virginia, space travel. Well, we could imagine that we could pull together groups to talk about those things from across different units. And the engagement they would get would be deeper around these topics than they might find were they returning to a reunion simply to see old friends. And I'm not diminishing seeing old friends. As you know, Brett, I'm an alum myself. So that's really important. But wouldn't it be great if we could also bring people together and they meet someone new who does something really interesting that they might not have met otherwise?
Well, Greg, thank you as always for your time. It's been fun to catch up here. The great thing about hosting a podcast is you can get curious about something or just have a thought. Like, I wonder what's going on with UVA Northern Virginia. I wonder where all their programming and planning stands at this moment. Let's get Greg on the podcast to talk about that. So that was the inspiration. And thank you so much for sharing your time. I just really think it is important for prospective students who are looking at Darden's programs and maybe curious about the DC area and our degree programs up here to hear about the broader efforts at the university and know what a big priority this is for the University of Virginia, too.
Brett, I'm just impressed that you kept this going for so long. I mean, it's a testament to your diligence, but it also your intellectual curiosity. It's just who you are, and it's really cool. Thank you for having me again.
And that was my conversation with Greg Fairchild, a Darden faculty member and Dean and CEO of UVA Northern Virginia. As always, if you have any comments, suggestions, requests, anything you'd like for us to cover here on the podcast, we're all ears. We can be reached at Darden, that's DARDEN, at virginia.edu. Until next time, stay safe, be well, and thanks for listening.